I did a video recently about my stationery setup and the use of Commonplace notebooks within my stationery toolkit. And for me, I always had a form of a Commonplace notebook stored in my traveler's notebook for quite a few years. There's effectively one refill, if you're familiar with the traveler's notebook, one refill inside this system here. It was dedicated to writing down quotes and passages from books that I was reading, my own personal reflections, some of the things that I was hearing throughout the day and wanting to scribble those down. And it effectively became a catch-all, which is what I ended up calling it, more than anything else. Yes, it was commonplacing, but it was commonplacing quite a bit of things, and it wasn't something that was necessarily easy for me to get back into and look through with respect to what I wanted to find or what I wanted to remember. It became a hodgepodge of many things, which is great in itself. The idea of splitting out certain topics in dedicated Commonplace notebooks became very appealing to me as I started splitting out some of the certain themes and categories that I was capturing my catch-all, which effectively turned this into its own commonplace around a certain category that I have in mind. And in this video, I want to show you a little bit about my Commonplace notebook setup, talk a little bit about why it was such a game changer for me, why I use Commonplace notebooks, and maybe a little bit of a quick how-to in terms of getting started with Commonplace notebooks. What is a Commonplace notebook? This term has been thrown around the internet and on YouTube quite a bit in the last few years. And it's interesting because the actual term, as I discovered, or the idea and the concept of a Commonplace notebook has been around for practically forever, or at least since the advent of writing, more or less. I mean, you've got great figures like Marcus Aurelius, you've got Virginia Woolf, lots of folks who have used Commonplace notebooks. You've even got folks like John Locke who have written books about how to organize and index one's Commonplace notebook. But what is a Commonplace notebook? Well, it's effectively a collection of ideas, quotes, passages that are relevant to you that you have gathered in one notebook. There were specific reasons where I decided that this was something that I really wanted to break out as a specific part of my stationery toolkit. Number one, create a notebook that is something that I personally want to read that helps me with my guiding principles. And even though it might contain information, quotes, and passages from other people, it's my own reference point, it's my own repository, and it's notebooks that I would want to frequently reference. Not to elevate myself into great writers by any means, and I'm certainly not one, but I like the idea of having notebooks on my shelf, just like I have books from other authors that I would personally want to grab and flip through. It's also been really good from the perspective of just avoiding doom scrolling, because I will pick up one of my own Commonplace notebooks, flip through it, and use that as a centering and anchoring point in my life more than anything else. Reason number two is around complementing my reading. I really love reading, and I like the idea of having one notebook or a span of notebooks that covers hundreds of other books in terms of relevant topics, relevant quotes, relevant ideas, and passages all combined and collated into one repository, one book that I can use as another great reference point in terms of things that are really helpful for me in my guiding principles. And number three, using up my stationery items, collecting lots of notebooks. I love notebooks, I love pens, and I like to give each of them a purpose in my stationery toolkit. Reasons number one or two are probably a bit more relevant than reason number three, but I like number three being a stationery channel and all. These are my Commonplace notebooks. My traveler's notebook here, which acts as my planner as well as my Commonplace. I have a planner in here and then my Commonplace in here, which I won't show you too much of that because they're all personal reflections, but this is a Commonplace for personal reflections on the go. Like I said, I had the catch-all in here acting as a Commonplace for everything. Now that I've pulled out certain categories and themes into different notebooks, this is only for personal reflections. And sometimes if I'm on the go, writing things down, that I'll shift over to other Commonplace notebooks. This notebook cover has 3 different Commonplace notebooks inside of it. and I usually keep it with me on the go. I've got a notebook dedicated to Stoicism and philosophy writings in here. Right now, I'm reading quite a bit of Ryan Holiday and Stoicism, and also reading Marcus Aurelius and a couple of other philosophers. So I'll gather those quotes and passages in here. I write the passage, I write the page number and the book that it's from, just so that I have some idea of where the source of information came from. Sometimes other authors will reference other authors. For example, we must live as if death hangs over us. The Marcus Aurelius writing. However, Ryan Holiday referenced it in Daily Dad. That's effectively it when it comes to these commonplace notebooks, is just a passage, a quote. I keep the page number, sometimes a chapter number, but the book that I reference it in. So this one is slowly being filled up with themes around Stoicism in particular. So I've got Marcus Aurelius in here, Ryan Holiday. I'm going to totally butcher this name because I keep forgetting how to pronounce it. Epictetus. Seneca in here as well. So I've just started this one and it's slowly being populated. I've got a commonplace notebook dedicated to my spirituality, in this case Buddhism. As I'm reading through things, I'll gather them in here. I like this because it's a really nice reference point for me. And what I'll do is, again, write the page number or the source of information where I got that quote or passage from. And I won't show this one, but it is an idea commonplace. So different from these two in the sense that these are quotes and passages from other authors, other people. This one is my own ideas and passages mostly, but it may reference other quotes and passages from other people. It's a repository for family related information and my marriage, things that I've been reflecting and contemplating on, things that are really useful in terms of parenting or family life and marriage, and the discussions my wife and I have and contemplations around those. So that is the commonplace for family, marriage, philosophy, spirituality. And I've got other commonplace notebooks as well. I've got a general commonplace notebook here. And I say general in the sense that this covers more broader topics, not necessarily Stoicism, philosophy, spirituality, but things that I find interesting. So I'll have quotes here from Gene Webster, for example. Anybody can rise to meet a crisis and face crushing tragedy with courage, but to meet the petty hazards of the day with a laugh, I really think that requires spirit. Next to other things that aren't necessarily related to that area. This is a poem by Christopher Logue, for example, called Come to the Edge. Come to the edge, we might fall, come to the edge. It's too high, come to the edge. And they came, and he pushed, and they flew. So not necessarily related to each other, but kind of general themes that I find very interesting. I refer to this one more so as a replacement for my phone. I'll flip through this and go, hey, that was interesting. But very clearly relevant to me. I've got quotes from Ben Franklin in here. The irony is, as I started this video talking about how my one catch-all covered so many different topics and themes, this is sort of turning into that, but not really. I really am focused on specific nuggets that may relate to philosophy, may relate to spirituality, but don't quite fall into either one of those categories. Some of the family themes, marriage themes, but don't quite fall into those categories. They're a bit more broad and reaching a little bit further across. So I'll capture that in here. My other commonplace notebook is my Stationery at 4. I've got actually a couple of these composition books. The other one is dedicated to learning, which I have just bought, haven't started filling out yet, but this is around my YouTube channel, for example. And this one's interesting from the perspective of the ideas and reflections, because I'll have ideas on video topics that I want to explore. I'll have storyboards for certain videos. I'll have tools and techniques in terms of how to light. So it's kind of great from that perspective of just really learning, do something like these videos for the YouTube channel, but also gives me a canvas to explore the narrative for the videos that I want to put up on the channel. So those are my commonplace notebooks centered around specific topics like my YouTube channel, learning, Stoicism, philosophy, marriage meetings, family meetings, family life, marriage life, and spirituality, and then kind of a general touches all those, but is a little bit more broader. Really cool passages and quotes from different authors. And then my traveler's notebook, which is basically my catch-all and on the go, my commonplace for my own personal quick reflections and ideas. So how do you create a commonplace notebook? Well, one of the things I can offer up right away is keep it simple. Keep it absolutely simple. There's nothing complicated about this. You can certainly complicate it, and more power to you if you want to do that. But I like the idea of keeping it simple, keeping it straight. All you really need is paper in a notebook format. Ideally in a notebook format, because then you've got one area, one collection of papers with that theme in mind, and something to write with. I like fountain pens. I like certain types of ballpoint pens, but I'm a stationary focused guy, and this is that kind of channel. Use whatever you have. You can also create digital commonplace versions or books for yourself, whatever works for you. I like gravitating towards the analog aspect just because, like I said, I really like the idea of having these commonplace notebooks sitting on my shelf and pulling them down and flipping through them. That's all you need in terms of getting started with commonplace notebooks. The other idea of indexing your commonplace notebooks, there are great sources of information on YouTube and on the internet with respect to how one can index their commonplace notebook. And I'm experimenting with a few different ways myself, but ultimately keep it simple, whatever works for you. And I think just experiment with it. The more important thing, in my humble opinion, is just getting the content into the notebook and then figuring out from there how you want to index, what makes sense to you. I'm experimenting between a line dedicated to a page and writing a few keywords in terms of the different quotes or passages or ideas that are relevant on that line. I'm also experimenting with this idea of the lock-in method. Not quite the lock-in method, but just picking the first letter and creating an index much like you would see in the back of a textbook or in the back of a cookbook. So I'm playing around with a few different ideas, but the one that two that I keep coming back to is having no index. Because my commonplace notebooks are centered around a certain topic and theme, it's really easy for me to flip through and find things that I want. But if I want to save the flipping through, the other index that I keep coming back to is just a line, a page number, and a few keywords around what's contained on that page. The other thing that's really useful for commonplacing, whether that's analog or digital, keeping your notebook close by you or on you at all times really helps. When I'm reading, I have a notebook right there with me so that I can quickly write things down. But also when I'm out and about, I've got a more or less pocket version of a notebook or two on me that I can gather ideas. And perhaps I'll do a little bit more of an in-depth look at how I specifically commonplace when I'm out and about. But ultimately, having a notebook around you that's easy to write in, that's accessible, is effectively all you really need in terms of commonplacing. And then the last thing really is just start documenting. There's no real science or art to it. Sometimes I include page numbers, sometimes I include chapter numbers, sometimes I include the author and the book. However you want to do it, just start experimenting with it. But the key elements really are writing the idea, the quote, the passage, and some way for you to reference where you got the source of information from. I personally like the idea of creating commonplace notebooks that are dedicated to topics and categories themselves. But I know a lot of folks also love the idea of having a commonplace notebook that covers multiple categories and multiple topics. Experiment with it, see what works for you. Ultimately, you want these things to help you. And for me, they really have. They really have replaced a lot of the digital exposure that we're so easily attuned to. Instead of going onto Instagram Reels, I will reach for a commonplace book. Instead of mindlessly watching TV, I'll reach for a commonplace notebook. And I love it because I'm constantly learning, I'm constantly gathering information that I'm finding relevant, and it gives me a little bit of an idea of where I'm headed, where I want to head, and my guiding principles, whether I'm working towards them or not. If you use a Commonplace notebook, let me know in the comment section below. I would love to hear from you and how you use your Commonplace notebooks. I think there's so many different ways that one can. Scrapbooking is a fantastic Commonplace notebook. I think it's great that we have this term commonplace, but I bet you there are so many nuances around commonplacing that we may or may not even know about yet. Thanks very much for joining me today. Take care and bye for now.